Hi, everybody. This is Brown here. Thought I'd go over the Korean War notes with you guys. I think it's a little bit easier if you hear me talking about them. And this will help you if you go through and then do the Korean War map questions with what happened in Korea in the 1950s. The Korean War was only a 3-year war. It didn't last very long, and it came down to communism and this idea that we had with the Soviets of, who was going to gain superiority. Was it going to be us? Was it going to be the Soviets? They obviously wanted communism. We wanted capitalism or democracy. So that's where it kind of all began. Okay. So going back a little bit, this is a little bit from last time too. I talked to you guys a little bit about the Berlin Airlift. I had you guys do that activity last week where you had to do some stuff on the Berlin Airlift. Basically what happened, and I think I have a map a little bit later on, is that the city of Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, was put into that Soviet section. So those 4 parts I talked to you guys about before, Berlin was just in the Soviet section. And so to make it fair, we decided to divide Berlin in half, and the east side of Berlin belonged to the Soviets, the west side of Berlin belonged to the other allies, so France, Great Britain, and ourselves. And that west side of Berlin, though, was located within Soviet territory. So they decided to put this blockade around it so to prevent us from putting any supplies into them. And we obviously didn't like that. The people in West Berlin didn't like that. And so we were trying to come up with a way because they wouldn't let our trucks go through. And we decided to use airplanes instead. And so you guys can see in the picture here, there is shipments coming in. About 200,000 shipments were made overall for them. Okay, here's NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Basically, we had to come up with a way of what we were going to do. And so we did something very similar to World War I, which we talked about before. We decided to create alliances. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was this alliance of all the Western democratic nations. And then in response to that, the Soviets were like, hey, if you're doing it, we're going to do it too. And they created the Warsaw Pact, which was this alliance between the Soviet Union and its satellite nations, kind of combating NATO. And here you guys can see that map I have of it. The red section are the Warsaw Pact nations, and the blue territories here in Europe are the NATO territories that we also belong to, and helping those countries not have communist takeover. All right, so coming down with Korea, and here comes the Korean War stuff. The issues with Korea at the time, like it says, during World War II, Korea was controlled by Japan. After the war, it was up for grabs. So who was going to take it? Well, they decided, again, that they were going to split it, so it was fair. And the Soviets gained control of North Korea, and Americans controlled South Korea. And we divided it at the 38th parallel, which is a latitude line that went between the nation. And kind of, I mean, if you look at the two halves, was pretty equal territory-wise. One of the people that was in charge, General MacArthur, you guys might remember this guy. We talked about him in World War II. It says he's a graduate from West Point. He was responsible for helping contain Japan after he was the one that accepted their surrender after World War II. And he was viewed as a hero to most people. But there was a problem because he liked FDR, kind of, but he really did not like Truman because he felt Truman was kind of like, they use the words too lenient. They thought he was kind of like not aggressive enough towards China and the Soviets and saying, hey, we don't want communism, get rid of them. But we didn't want to start a war. So he had definitely different views than President Truman over what should be done at the time. So when the Korean War, or the Korean conflict as it's known, technically there was never war declared in Congress. So that's why it's called a conflict and not a war. So what happened in the beginning? In 1950, North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel. This could have been considered an act of war, but we didn't want to start that because we knew the Soviets were right there. So at this point, General MacArthur, we used the newly created United Nations, and he was the one leading UN troops in doing so, okay? So North Koreans, as it said, quickly went into South Korea. We decided to land at 2 places, Pusan, which is in the southeast corner, and Incheon, which is up towards the northwest corner of the troops, okay? Then the next part, Korean War, UN troops, we successfully pushed them back to North Korea, and we got them out of there. The UN troops were pretty successful overall. The problem is that what they were going to do after this point. Okay, so it says they were pushing towards China. They ended the stalemate right around the border of China, and at that point there was 2 decisions: either to push the North Koreans back completely, or we were going to do something else